So yeah, this picture was taken back in 1989, probably about July 1989. And my dad, who I think is possibly listening in on this Zoom chat as well, had a job out in Chile. And at that point, there were no direct flights out to Chile, so we had to stop off somewhere. At one time, we stopped off in Ecuador, and then were lucky enough to go to the Galapagos Isles for 5 days, where I took this picture. And at that point, I was kind of a sort of, sort of really enjoyed my photography, but it wasn't sort of anything more serious than that. I mean, I was 1989, I was just turned 16, and took this shot, and it ended up being got to the semi-final of the Young Wildlife Photographer of the Year award, and that kind of gave me the sort of the boost that I kind of needed, if you like, to then go on to actually pursue the photography itself, which has certainly not always been the easiest of jobs, that's for sure. Right, so basically I ended up with two kind of specialist areas, just the way it worked out really. The first of them was out here in the Caribbean, from where you can see this picture. I was in the rather fortunate position of having a second uncle who produced Air Jamaica's in-flight magazine out in Jamaica. So he took a risk, got me out there taking pictures for him, and not only was it photographing Jamaica itself, but all the beautiful islands that Air Jamaica used to fly to. And Antigua is one of them. This is, I think it's still my best-selling photograph. I think quite a few people have said, oh yes, I've got that on my wall, or I've seen it in the doctor's waiting room and things like that. So it might look vaguely familiar to you. And a couple of more from the Caribbean. This one from Dominican Republic. It's just one of those very lucky moments where this flamingo had actually escaped from a local hotel and was walking on the beach. I just managed to get one shot of it with no one in the background, but that's all we need, just one good shot. And then the other sort of, one of the other main specialist areas that I went to for my photography was Tibet. So a little bit of a contrast, to say the least, from the Caribbean. A lot colder, a lot higher altitude, and in some ways a lot harder work, really, because as I was kind of just mentioning beforehand, they didn't really like photographers in Tibet. Chinese, they're always quite sensitive about those things. So it was always a bit of a, always felt like quite a risk going there, but it was worth it, that's for sure. This was taken at Tibetan New Year, which just happened in the last couple of days, and they hang these thousands of prayer flags up on hills and places like that, and then throw these very light paper prayer flags into the wind, and they kind of get caught in the updrafts and fly up into the sky. Really, really stunning sight. This is another Tibetan New Year photograph, actually from eastern Tibet, and on sort of Tibetan New Year day, they would unroll this huge, it's called a tanker, a sort of applique picture of the Buddha on this hillside, say a few prayers for half an hour, and then roll it up until next year. But really, really stunning sight. Another one from Tibetan New Year, some monks blowing very, very long horns at the start of a ceremony. Really sort of, you can kind of imagine this classically beautiful Himalayan scene of mist in the valley and these monks blowing their horns, and yeah, really, really stunning place. Mount Everest, the north side of Mount Everest, so the Tibetan side of it. So I was about 18,000 feet by that point, and the difference of sort of going an extra 1,000 feet at that stage, you really notice it. So it just, the mind boggles to imagine what it's like going up to the top to 29,000 feet. Just ridiculous. This is one from the Indian Himalayas. This is actually the Indian Himalayas where I started my whole Tibetan business. Ended up getting a job for a trekking company working in the Himalayas there, which was an amazing break for someone sort of starting off in the photography world, where I didn't get paid, but he paid for all my film and processing and sort of living in India for 6 months, which is pretty good going, really. And the other area one of the other areas I really love taking photographs is the desert. This one's actually in Morocco. I just love the sort of simplicity of those dunes, and sort of curves and amazing textures you get and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I mean, this shot in some ways is kind of my ideal picture, really. It's, you know, very, very simple, but kind of makes it more effective as a result. And kind of the other specialist area I ended up taking photographs in was Malawi. This is that's kind of because well, quite a lot of you probably know Eleanor, my wife, is infectious diseases doctor, now in Addenbrooke's, but for about a year and a half, she managed to get a job out in Blantyre, Malawi, working in the medical school and in the local hospital. This was actually taken about an hour from where we lived, in this incredible tea estate. And all those green bushes you can see there are actually the fresh green tea leaves growing on the hillside. And then in September, the trees, the jacaranda trees, would drop all their leaves, and then you'd be left with these incredible purple flowers all over the trees. And then just to complete this scene, because I do always like to try and get a person in my pitch to complete a scene, this lady walks through with two enormous stalks of bananas on her head and a baby on her back. So sort of classic, sort of hard-working Malawian lady. But as well as sort of kind of choosing my own destinations for where I went to go, I then also ended up doing a lot of jobs for what's kind of now TUI, but started off as First Choice and then Thompson, photographing all over the place for them. This is one out in Mauritius, but there was some sort of beautiful outdoor work, but it's fair to say there was a lot of indoor work, photographing hotels, which, you know, after a while, sort of one ends up looking much like another. Even if you're in sort of, I don't know, Mauritius, you kind of rather like to be outside photographing lovely beaches and things like that. So that was my, that's a sort of, you know, that's the kind of the brief bit of my talk, the pre-Bake Off life, even though actually it's a far bigger chunk of my life. I mean, I've been working now for 26 years or so, and Bake Off was, well, I was just going through the audition process 6 years ago. So how did it all start? Well, there's this kind of photograph is kind of the principal reason for it, really. Back in 2014, I was doing one of my many big jobs on this house, and whilst I was doing the dining room, Eleanor was started watching Bake Off on a laptop, and I would sort of occasionally glance over her shoulder, and after a few episodes, I was hooked. And you know, this is despite sort of many years of people saying, "Oh, yeah, you must watch this program, you'd love it. It's right up your street." But eventually, yes, I finally sat down and started watching it, and was, I have to say, absolutely amazed at these ridiculous creations that people were making. And then this is Nancy having just won in the final of Bake Off. And in the background, you can see all these people gathered. And that's because on the final day of Bake Off, they have a great tea party where all the family and friends of the bakers go along to it. And as we were watching this, Eleanor said, "Oh, Ian, that looks like such a fabulous tea party. I'd love to go to that. Go on, put an application form in." So I did. And yeah, then yeah, it all kind of started to go a bit strange from there. But before I did, actually, some of you will recognize this all too familiar scene. Probably not too sad to not be able to see it anymore. Of course, it is the Wilbraham Old Village Hall, and the final fundraiser that they hosted there was the Christmas Bake Off, for which I baked my first ever Christmas cake, which was a straight out the can Delia Smith recipe. But the one thing I did do to it was decorate it in macaroons. Well, that ended up helping me win the Wilbraham Christmas Bake Off. So dare I say, a little bit of a step down from the Bake Off, but that's nonetheless, I did manage to win that. So yeah, that was the Christmas cake, and the idea behind it was that the macaroons, which were kind of one of the few fancy things that I could do before Bake Off, the macaroons were kind of meant to look like stacked up, meant to look like a Christmas tree, with the baubles being the pink ones. And like, well, it doesn't really look like a Christmas tree. But anyway, it was enough, and it won me the Christmas Bake Off, and that kind of gave me, I guess, the extra confidence to put in the application form. Now, the application form had to be in on January the 8th, and fortunately, George's birthday is on January the 4th, and so he was turning 5, so and was just starting to really get into his Lego. So I thought, right, okay, we'll go to town, we'll really make a special cake, because I needed photographs of my bakes for the application form. And up until that point, I'd never photographed my bakes. I just, made a cake, or made an apple crumble, baked it, and then ate it. But so I had nothing to put down on the application form. So I thought, perfect chance, George's birthday, make a ridiculous over-the-top birthday cake. So I made this, what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layered cake. Obviously different colors, and each different color corresponded to a different flavor. So I think we had blackberry, then blueberry, then lime, then lemon, orange, raspberry, and strawberry, something like that. And then obviously hollowed out and filled with Smarties. Then I made the little, in a mold, I made little chocolate Lego men to go on the top, and then covered the whole cake in this slightly lurid yellow icing to look like a giant Lego head. So, I think you'd probably say quite an impressive cake. The only snag being, of course, that George didn't like cake, and still doesn't like cake to this day. So he wasn't very impressed at all with it, but luckily his friends were, and luckily it obviously made an impression on the application form. Because a few days later, I got a phone call from them, and we had quite a long sort of chat, about half an hour or so, and asked me a few technical questions, which I was actually able to get right. And then put down the phone and thought, well, that went fairly well. And then a couple of weeks later, got another phone call from them saying, good news, Ian. Friday evening at 7 o'clock, good news, Ian. We'd like you to come down for an audition in London. Please could you bring a sweet and a savoury bake? But only snag was I was going away to the Lake District the following morning for the weekend for an overnight running event. So yeah, as it sounds, you set off at 10 o'clock at night and you run through the night until about 6 in the morning. So it's like, really sorry guys, love to, but I'm doing this. And they're like, it's now or never. This is the last auditions. So it's right, okay, here we go. So I was very excited to get this phone call, and consequently didn't really sleep at all on the Friday night, and then ran all of Saturday night. So I was absolutely shattered on Sunday and good for nothing. So slept all day and then all Sunday night as well. And then it was Monday, and it's like, well, I had to sort of dream up these ideas. So came up with this idea, and it's kind of started my whole sort of idea for Bake Off, that I had to take some risks. And so I came up with this idea for a cake. And it's kind of tricky to see it, but there's a giant chocolate macaroon base, and I'd never made anything like that before. It then had 2 layers of chocolate Genoese sponge on top of it, which I'd never made before, and then a Swiss meringue buttercream covering the whole cake as well, which I'd never made before in my life as well. So the whole thing was a total sort of winging it kind of cake. Yeah, that's what I decided I had to do. I had to pull out all the stops to do something really quite impressive. And as well as that, so that was kind of the fancy me. And then I thought, I'll just show a bit of day-to-day me. So I made a loaf of my regular bread, which I was sort of making for the family, basically, a good couple of times a week at that point. And so yeah, took these bakes and then I didn't finish making the cake until about 1 in the morning on that Monday night, and once again totally wired and couldn't actually get to sleep. So went down to this interview on Tuesday morning feeling a bit shot, and a bit in another world really. And basically we had to present our bakes to the home economy team, and then just a few of us would get selected to meet the casting director. And I just saw all these people just bringing in these incredible bakes, and I just thought, I have no idea how you make that. And then they were sort of being given that thanks but no thanks, and I was thinking, God, I've lost so much sleep over this over the last couple of days, and sweated so much about this darn cake. Yeah, kind of to my you know, continued surprise, they said, okay, we'd like you to meet the casting director. And that's the moment when I kind of feel like I took my biggest risk of all in the whole audition process. When she said to me, she said, okay, Ian, what can you bring to Bake Off that's different? Now, you've got to bear in mind that apparently for my series, something like 23,000 people applied. So, you know, you've kind of got to stand out from the crowd a little bit. So she said, what could you bring that's different? So I said, well, okay, well, I'm quite sort of energetic from the running I do, and I'm quite creative from the photography I do. And also, I really like to see Paul and Mary eat a roadkill pie on television. She said, oh, no one said that to me before. So it's like, right, okay. This could go one of either two ways. But of course, it went the right way. But I didn't know that at the time, but I knew it was a risk I had to take. So it was quite a long sort of radio silence. And then finally got another call saying, good news, Ian, we'd like you to come down to London. This time, here is a set recipe for a bog standard loaf of white bread. And we'd also like you to make some shortbreads. And once again, I decided I had to take a risk. I had to do things differently. So instead of just doing a standard plate of little fingers or little rounds of shortbread, I ended up making what I have to say is a sodding great Scottish thistle. So, I mean, it's about sort of 10 inches high, this thing. But I thought, yeah, we've got this set quantity of ingredients. Let's do it different. I think shortbreads are Scottish. I never know. I always associate them with Scotland. So yeah, went down to the interview, and they laid all our plates out on the table, and there were 11 little plates of delicate fingers and rounds, and then this weird Scottish thistle at the end of them. Like, okay, right, so there we go, something different. But they liked what they saw, and a few weeks later, just before Ellen's birthday, on March the 10th, I think it was, got a phone call while, appropriately enough, I was standing at the kitchen sink just behind me doing the washing up. And it's about 4:30 in the afternoon, and it's got the phone call saying, really pleased to say, Ian, you've got a place in Bake Off. Like, oh my God, what have I done? But yeah, absolutely on cloud nine, really, really exciting conversation with this lady. And then put down the phone, at which point I heard George calling from the other end of the house, finish! Like, right, okay, clearly there's daily life to take care of first of all. No glam around here yet, that's for certain. So yeah, then started a whole long period of several weeks of recipe development and testing. So basically what happened was on the few days later, they started telling us what the challenges were. So for example, in week one, we want you to make a Madeira cake and then a Black Forest gatto. Go away and make it your own. So yeah, then head into the kitchen and get baking. I'd never made a Madeira cake or a Black Forest gatto or anything like that before. So there was a lot to learn. Now, so at this point of the talk, I'm going to try and it might sound confusing, but what I'm going to do is slightly jumble up time and talk about each week at a time. So not only the practicing and preparation of it, but how it actually ended up going in the show. So obviously this is week one, when we all 12 of us there, all looking sort of more or less happy and innocent and ready to go. And so the first thing we had to do was make this Madeira cake. And yeah, as I said, I'd never made one before, but spent a lot of time sort of cooking this quite a simple cake, but didn't feel I really got it until about the day before I went down to the tent. And by this point, this was now the end of April that I actually went to the tent, and basically I'd given up everything over the previous few weeks in order to prepare for the show. I'd sort of cut short a family holiday in Norway in order to come home and make pies and Swiss roll. What's going on in my life? I'd rather make pie than go on holiday in Norway. But that's what I had to, I felt it was worth the risk, basically. So anyway, yes, went to that first week in the tent, and Paul tried the cake and said, yeah, it's got a nice flavour to it, but it's kind of like eating wallpaper paste. Of course, some wag on the internet made this funny mock-up. But yeah, and you think, gosh, all the preparation I've done, and then straight away you're shot down in flames like that. But that was just a signature challenge, and I guess that week kind of set the way things were going to be in terms of, okay, I might do okay at the signature challenge, but it was the showstopper where I really wanted to pull out all the stops. So did the Black Forest Gatto. This is George kind of pretending that he actually quite liked to eat it when he definitely wouldn't, because not only does he not like cake, but he especially doesn't like chocolate. So definitely not his scene at all. But this was one of the many test cakes that that I had to produce. But you can, at the bottom there, what you can actually see is the giant chocolate macaroon base that I did for the audition cake all those weeks beforehand. So it's kind of all those little things ended up coming in useful. The macaroons, once again, they were my sort of party trick. And the theme for this cake was the tree in the Black Forest, So we had to, it was a weird sort of caramel and chocolate tree that that had cherries hanging off it. So yeah, I had to sort of try and perfect this idea and this design with all these different cakes. So given that George doesn't like cake, Eleanor doesn't particularly like chocolate cake, especially dark chocolate cake. Zoe and I had to eat quite a lot of cake. And of course, the thing was, I had to kind of keep it a secret. I think it's fair to say it was a pretty poorly kept secret in the village, and rather a lot of people knew about it, but knew the fact that I was actually on Bake Off. But what I really didn't want to share was what I was actually producing. There were a couple of people who did know what was going on, and they were sort of very trusted testers, and so they did end up eating quite a lot of cake and sweet things over those weeks, but they were good people who'd sort of not just go, great cake, lovely, more the merrier, but would actually sort of be able to pick it apart and go, yeah, this is nice, but we need more black currants in here, or less of this, or da-da-da-da. Yeah, as I say, the family enjoyed rather a lot of it. I had to go down to the tent actually on my birthday of April the 24th, but it so happens that Zoe's birthday is on April the 23rd. So I asked her what cake she wanted, and she said, oh, I really like a Black Forest Gatto, Daddy. It's like, great, perfect, we can do one of those. The more practice sessions, the better. So it had to kind of obviously go easy on the kirsch in it, but otherwise it was is exactly what I was doing in the tent. But yeah, and say all those practices, that was kind of one of the keys to it, really, was that it almost had to become muscle memory making these cakes, so that we basically just didn't have to look at the instructions at all, just knew instinctively what to have to do. So yeah, I had a pretty shaky time, I think it's fair to say, in week one. And I remember someone in the tent saying, it's all right to screw up in Bake Off, so long as someone else screws up more than you. And I think that's how I would describe that first week in Bake Off. Someone else screwed up more than me. So I survived, and on I went. And then it was onto Biscuit Week. And for Biscuit Week, we had to make a biscuit box out of a box that was sort of made of biscuit, but also had to contain another type of biscuit in there. Now, I was meant to be an engineer, but I slightly rebelled as a teenager and went off and did the photography. My dad was an engineer, but I just didn't quite want to follow in his footsteps. But then I kind of realized that actually with Bake Off, that I could sort of bring those engineering skills to the show, if you like, really. And that's what could help me make these bakes. So it was out the angle grinder, on with the a way to make a box out of biscuits. at that point, now I know I could glue a box effective of biscuit together using caramel, but then I just didn't have a clue, so I wasn't sure what I was doing. Yeah, it was on with the biscuit box, and basically my idea was to produce a cylinder of shortbread, and then we could put the biscuits inside there. So this was my first attempt, which I think you'll probably agree is definitely no showstopper, to say the least. That was it was a test. And I could see it kind of worked. So it's like, right, okay, that was okay, but we clearly need to do a lot of developing from here. So oops, let's go here now. This was the next attempt, and you can see there we've got quite good sort of chunky walls that will hold together and will help, could actually become a proper box. But clearly a lot more testing required. And this was a lid made from a tart tin. It turned out to be really, really heavy chunk of shortbread, and clearly wasn't suitable at all. We were eating a lot of shortbread at that point. We really were. Fortunately, it's one of the few sweet things that George actually likes, so he was able to tuck into that. And then this was my next idea for the lid, was to basically make a giant jammy dodger. So that jammy dodger is actually sort of, I don't know, 25, 30 centimeters across. So really quite nice, I have to say. I really enjoyed that one. So this is George kind of helping out in a way, but what it shows is how it was made. Now I'll just see if I can stop the share for a moment. So that slab sort of on the counter in front of him is obviously actually a long thin piece of shortbread. So this is what the actual piece of metalwork I used to make the biscuit box from good old Mackay's in Cambridge. Oh, they were a godsend, they really were. So thin sheet of aluminium bent round, I think it was bent round a Dulux paint pot. And what would happen is that slab of shortbread would get wrapped around here, and then another aluminium ring would go around that, and then using these pieces of string, that would go all the way around, and then would I'd tie them off, and then place it all on a baking sheet, and it would hopefully, fingers crossed, bake from there. But it was a risky business, say the least. That's for sure. Let me just go back to this screen here. Yeah, quite fun. And as I say, ridiculous. Oh, let me just go to George right there. So that was another attempt at it, and you can see it's kind of it's more or less worked. Down the right hand side, I think, as you look at it, there's a thin white line on the biscuit box. That's where one of the edges of the aluminium had pinched it a bit. The principle was working. Hang on, let's just go back here again. Okay. But still a lot of testing to do yet. And then it was the sort of decoration, and the decoration was something I just couldn't do. I really struggled with it. But this was another attempt, trying ideas. And then yet another attempt going in a slightly different direction, keeping it simple on the outside, but decorating the outside with the macaroons. And the macaroons were going to be the biscuits that I was going to put inside the biscuit box. And this, I guess, is probably about the final practice version. More or less exactly what I ended up doing in the tent. That was what I did produce in the tent. Just worked. There's a few little cracks in it here or there, but got away with it, I think I'd probably say. And that was the final thing, which, much to my huge surprise, ended up getting me the Star Baker accolade. And I really do genuinely mean huge surprise. I mean, I wrote in my journal on the way to, I kept a journal the whole time I was doing Bake Off. I remember sitting in Paddington Station writing something about, I've just got to survive biscuit week, and then I'll be on to bread week, which is kind of my comfort zone. So yeah, to come away with the Star Baker was, totally amazing. Really cool. But then it was on to, bread week, as I say. This is, I think they're called Bradfield Woods or something like that, just to the southeast of Bury St Edmunds. And come sort of March, April, May, covered in this amazing carpet of wild garlic. This was actually taken back in, was taken in May when I went to get some wild garlic for the actual show. I mean, luckily I found it during the practice time during March, and it went from there. But wild garlic, I think, is lovely. It's one of my sort of favourite ingredients to forage. So it kind of felt like a very me thing to do, which is obviously the idea of a signature challenge. But it's also very, very tasty. So I had to make a wild garlic quick bread. So sort of basically a soda bread. I don't know, it's a pesto, garlic pesto soda bread. So jolly nice stuff. And then the other one was the showstopper was a bread sculpture featuring 3 different types of flour. So for that one, we had the main bit of the bread was baked in this very flour pot, nothing fancy, you know, probably just a sort of bog standard thing you'd buy in Scottsdale's. And then the other bit, sort of mold, was kind of possibly my favourite bit of engineering I probably made in Bake Off, which was this rather lethal looking bit of steel. Most of my stuff's made of aluminium, but this one was steel because it had to go in the oven. And so you can imagine that's actually the plant that was baked. So basically, I get a big sort of flat piece of dough, drape it over the top. This had some baking parchment on it, and then I just use a pair of scissors to cut around it, and these are the leaves that would sort of come off it. So it's pretty out there in terms of baking molds, but it did the job, which was all required. So this was one of the first tests I did, and you know, inevitably the first tests would take hours to do them. And it's got these long sort of stalks for the flowers to go on, and you know, they all look pretty good. What I then realised, though, when I started to speed up the process, was that those breadsticks that the flowers were on, when you put them in the flower pot themselves, you know, in the flower pot bread, they would just get warm and moist and immediately just flop over. Well, yeah, we enjoyed a lot of bread that during that period. Some good bread for comedy noses and a lot of strange round sandwiches. But quite nice to have something savoury for a change, that was for sure. Yeah, that was the final result, the one I actually made in the tent, and yeah, it was literally not until the morning of that I went down to the tent that I kind of figured out how I was going to do it, which basically involved baking the flower pot bread with a kind of aluminium tube in the dough for about half the time, and then removing it and putting it back in the oven, and then that would give a nice sort of crust for the breadsticks to go in, and thus. But you can see the stalks of those flowers are pretty short, to say the least. But it worked, and yeah, once again ended up coming away with the Star Breaker prize, which is cool. Then it was on to possibly my favourite week, which is pudding week. Lots of lovely rich puddings, starting off with creme brulees, really gorgeous things. And then the showstopper for that week was 3 layers of cheesecake. And for that, you know, basically each week I felt I had to take a risk. And that week I decided to use some quite sort of alternative herbs and flavours for these cheesecakes. So we had a strawberry and Sichuan peppercorn cheesecake on the base, then had a rosemary and salted caramel with pecan cheesecake on top of that, and then an apple and tarragon one at the top. So yeah, slightly alternative flavors, but thankfully, once again, they really, really liked them, and I came away with my third and final Star Baker prize for Bake Off. We did eat very well that during those weeks. They were really, I do like a cheesecake, I have to say. So jolly good stuff. And this was something quite cool that a sort of a model maker somewhere out there in Twitter land, if you were Star Baker, she would make a tiny model of your showstopper bake. So these are her version of the cheesecakes, which I think is very amazing, really is. So then it was on to Free From week 5, and I was kind of quite relieved when Paul and Mary didn't actually like this cake, because you know, you can kind of imagine by that point I got 3 Star Baker awards on the trot. I think everyone was like, who the hell is this guy, what's going on here? So yeah, when they said they didn't go for this, it's like, that's fine, I can live with that. But then the showstopper for that week was an ice cream. It had to be a dairy-free ice cream. So I ended up doing a mango and coconut ice cream. And then it had to be sort of in a Swiss roll outside. So this is sort of a first test, and kind of in some ways almost fortuitously at that point, we had a slightly rubbish freezer that froze things very slowly. And I realized using that freezer, I just couldn't get the ice cream to freeze within the time limit. So I ended up, instead of doing it as one solid block, having these two little boats. They would sort of freeze each half of it, and then I would stick them together to make the real thing, to make it whole. But to start with, I had a sort of a line of sorbet running across the middle, which you can kind of just see in the photograph. In the end, I actually switched to having a tube of sorbet. It's got slightly squashed in this photograph, but that would run through the middle of the Swiss roll. Sorry, the middle of the ice cream. This is George kind of pretending he likes it, if only so that he can put his Lego and his Playmobil on there. As it was, of course, being the BBC, he wasn't allowed anything like Lego on there, but he was allowed his rubber duck to make it onto my dessert island. And there you can kind of see the little circle of sorbet running through the middle of the ice cream. So yeah, that was another week survived, and then it was on to week 6. And my funny little risk for that week was that about the day before I was due to go down to the tent, we discovered a massive nest of our slightly infamous guinea fowl eggs in the garden, and there were about sort of 20 eggs in there or something like that. So I decided, instead of making the frangipane tart out of regular hen's eggs, I would use the guinea fowl eggs. So which were, you know, basically the same as regular eggs, but they ended up making a very, very yellow frangipane tart. But it was quite cool to bring something different to the tent like that. I think they kind of appreciate stuff like that. And then the showstopper for that week was kind of like my nemesis, really, of the whole thing, which was vol au vents. And I always think it's no coincidence that in this picture I've got a large bottle of sherry in front of me as I try and get these flipping vol au vent pastries to work, because basically what would happen is they would kind of rise up and then they would just flop over. But as it happened in the tent, it's one of those really fortunate mistakes where I was meant to fold the pastry 6 times in order to give it the necessary rise, but I lost count and only did it 5 times. So though my vol au vents weren't terribly high, they did at least rise up and not fall over. So Lady Luck was definitely shining down on me that day. But that was one of those weeks where the showstopper didn't really go to plan. And so I had made some quite nice, I think, mushroom and truffle oil ones. They were good and they looked good, because at that point our thyme in the garden was flowering. So they were sort of decorated with all these lovely thyme flowers. The bacon, what they have labelled as bacon and vermouth, was actually scallop bacon and vermouth, but with squid ink in. And those, I just ran out of time to finish them off. So instead of being decorated with lots of lovely greenery and stuff like that, they were just black. And everyone talks about how you use your eyes to, to help you appreciate food. Yeah, just being black, they just didn't look very appetizing at all. And I think, yeah, you can kind of see here, there's just these sort of weird black blobs sticking out of vol au vent cases. Yeah, didn't win any prizes, but it was one of those weeks where luckily someone else screwed up more than me, and so I survived, and on I went. And then it was on to kind of the week that felt like it was made for me, really, because this was game pie. So it was like, really, after that slightly rash comment all those weeks beforehand, and I was being asked to make a game pie. So this was a first test of it, using a beautiful Victorian sort of pie mold that I was lent. And though it was fantastic, it looked great. Problem was, it was one of those challenges where they really, really squeezed us for time. So I just knew I wouldn't be able to do it in the time. So I thought, I'm just going to have to do another trip down to Mackay. So came up with this idea. I got a couple of bits of metal and then bent them together, and as you can see, it sort of ends up making a nice little simple bird shape. And so that's what I did. Ended up making this little bird with a little, gave him a couple of pastry feet. And they kind of, you know, in some ways I got marks off for it being quite simple in the decoration front, just whacking a wing on it. But it cooked within the time limit, and that was the crucial thing. But of course, yeah, that particular bake ended up landing me on the front cover of Heat magazine, amongst many other things, which was yeah, something I never quite expected in my life, but that was the way it went at that point. So but that was only that was only the signature challenge for that week, even though it felt like the bake that was made for me. That was only the signature challenge, and the other one was the we had to do a Charlotte Russe, which was our longest challenge for the show, 5.5 hours, which is very rich set custard, and then we had to cover the outside with these Savoyard ladyfingers biscuits. So that was the first attempt. I decided to, because it was Victorian week, that was the idea. I decided to do Victoria's crown. So that was another attempt. Luckily, the crown had alternative uses, even though George wasn't too sure about them clearly. And yeah, more and more tests and different version. You know, and I think each one used something like 20 eggs, something ridiculous like that. So I was cranking through the eggs. I think that was the final test version. But as you can kind of see, they're not really looking like ladies' fingers. They're more looking like butcher's thumbs or something. But that was what the testing was all about. And then finally, that was the version I ended up making in the tent, which yeah, it was a great bake to do. Really, yeah, long one. And it was a 5.5 hour challenge, and I needed every little minute of that 5.5 hours. And it was the bake they ended up using for an extra slice, the show they do on Friday night, and they make a sort of a cake topper with a sculpture of you and your sort of best bake, if you like, most famous bake, and so that's what they ended up doing. And then it was on to patisserie week 8. We're nearly there, folks. And we had to do something called a religieuse d'ancienne, which I'd never heard of in my life, and had to Google it and thought, oh my God, how on earth am I going to make that? A ridiculous sort of tower of eclairs and pastry. And you can see in the background there on top of the Argo, there's just sort of sea of failed eclairs that I couldn't get them to work. They would just always deflate when I took them out of the oven, and you can see there's a huge pile of eggs in front of me, but just had to keep on testing and testing. And it was an interesting engineering challenge, this one, because as I said, we had to stack 3 layers of eclairs on top of each other with a pastry sort of base on each, and then on top of that we had to put a couple of extra choux buns, and although these eclairs aren't filled, a couple of them are iced at the top, straight away they collapsed, and you can see the remnants sitting on the side there. This was the next kind of full attempt at it, and I think that probably lasted about another 30 seconds before that fell over as well. But luckily, of all the 5 versions I've actually made of this, those 2 before the show, and I actually made 2 afterwards. The only one that actually stayed upright was the one on the show. But you think, well, if I need one, then that's the one I need. So yeah, I was kind of lucky. And a lot of people struggled. That's actually my Uncle Tony's 80th birthday, which was the week after the Bake Off final, and I made it for him. And that expression's because it's just about to topple over as well. So a tricky one. And then it was on to week 9, which was chocolate week. And of course, as I said, we had to do is submit the first 9 weeks worth of recipes. And as I said, it was a huge amount of work. And I thought, well, by the end of, week 9, I'll never make it there. I'll long be booted off by then. So I said, you just say, right, I'm going to make a chocolate well, and not actually think about it. But as it got closer and closer, it's like, uh-oh, I am actually going to have to do this. So these are sort of some first designs I drew up in the journal I kept, just sort of alternative ideas. And then this is more of a sort of, I don't know, sort of a maker's architectural kind of drawing of what each panel of chocolate or shortbread was going to look like. Then it was on to an actual sort of model, bit of cardboard, bit more aluminium from Mackay's. And then this was the first attempt. Obviously the shortbread biscuit box had gone well, so I thought I'd try and make it out of shortbread to start with. It had to be a chocolate centerpiece, this particular showstopper, but it had to have a baked element in there. So I made this to start with, and though it kind of just worked, it kind of looked a bit sort of clumsy and crude. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to go back to, start again and actually make it out of chocolate instead. So we got testing. This was one of the many test versions. The great thing about this was that, of course, being chocolate, you could make it, see if it worked, practice, and then just melt it all back down again. So yeah, there's one bit of chocolate George kind of enjoyed, really. And that was the final practice version, which I've more or less got here. Still got it in pretty good working order, apart from I did just bash off the handle when I was talking about it a couple of weeks ago. So it's missing the handle. But the great thing is being sort of, I mean, I've still got it all here. So I've just got to get these bits, and basically the chocolate is, you can use chocolate as glue. So and I broke it apart a little while ago, taking a corner a bit too fast when I was a bit late for a WI talk. It easily sticks together. So yeah, that was the final practice version, and you can notice all the sort of white chocolate work. Unfortunately, in the tent, I just ran out of time and didn't have a chance to do it. So it didn't look quite as fancy. So it kind of marks off for that, but they really, really loved the idea of it, as you can kind of see there. And the idea was that basically they would use that little handle to lower the bucket down into the well of white chocolate and cream and a bit of lemony flavors as well. And yeah, it was the slightly ridiculousness of it, I think, is what saved me. So I was surprised I managed to get through that week, but I did. I got through to the final. But yeah, things were not looking good around here by that point. We really were looking in quite a mess, to say the least. Yeah, you can just see sort of tins and just chocolate and stuff everywhere. I mean, just everywhere. It's just ridiculous. But there was work to be done, and so they wanted, for the final, they wanted three cakes, same type of cake, but not as a tier. So I thought, well, I can't do fancy decoration, so I'm just going to have to go big. And so came up with this idea, instead of doing 3 cakes, I'm going to do 5 cakes, and it's actually going to be the sort of the colossal curvy carrot, I ended up calling it. And this is a first design for it. And there you kind of get the idea of vaguely what it was intended to look like. Zoe giving it a customary hands up, George giving it his customary thumbs down. And as you can imagine, by this point, there was a lot of cake flying around this house. There really was. And at that point, I let Eleanor take one of them into work. And I always remember she gave one of them a slice to the ward clerk, who tried it and went, "Oh, Eleanor, this is really, really nice cake. He should go and be on that baking show, you know." At which point she had to quietly die of laughter in her office. So yeah, and that was it was a lovely moment with that final. It was incredibly hectic trying to get it finished on time, and I've made it lots of time since then, and I've never managed to finish it in less than about 7 hours. But it was a 4-hour challenge. And basically, I ran out of time and just needed to put a few more pecans on one of the cakes. And they're like, "No, that's it. Your time's up. You can't do anything else." And Mel walked over and says, "Ian, you can't do anything else, but I can," and put the last few pecans on the cake for me, which was a great moment. But anyway, in the background there, of course, you can see the tea party taking place. And this was kind of the whole reason that I was there, really, for Eleanor to go to the tea party. as it was, she didn't enjoy it at all, really, because she was super stressed about what was going on in the tent. She had no idea what we were actually doing in there. So she was super stressed for the first half of the party about what was going on. And for the second half of the party, she was consoling weeping children because Daddy didn't win. So all in all, it was a pretty rubbish party, but I did my bit and I got her there. So, you know, I tried. So what's happened since? A lot of weird stuff, and I think this is kind of the pinnacle of weirdness when yeah, basically I ended up having to go on stage at the O2 Arena and present the Dalai Lama with a birthday cake. So I had to, yeah, walk up in front of 10,000 people and give him cake, which was very peculiar. But when he comes to the UK, I do his photography. So there was kind of a little bit of a connection there, but it was still very strange to be presenting him with cake. Very entertaining business. Been a lot of sort of commercial jobs. This was one of the first ones for Beaver elderflower cordials, coming out with cakes and recipes for them. This was quite a messy one for Dr. Urtka, using some of their slightly strange products for decorating biscuits for Mother's Day. Yeah, this is a kitchen. One or two of you might know this kitchen, or might have known this kitchen back in the days that Betty Bolger used to live here. And so, you know, though it's not a bad sized room, it was actually a terrible kitchen in terms of the space for making food, because you can see most of the surfaces are covered in stuff. But actually that worked really well for Bake Off because you know, you don't have a big bench in order for working in the tent, so it was actually quite similar. So that's what it used to look like. Thankfully, since Bake Off, we've had it totally totally redone. Lovely huge oven with a massive cake on the table, but it always looks like a complete bombshell. And there's never a big cake like that around, that's for sure. But yeah, a lot of other fun stuff has come of it. This was one of the bigger jobs, actually, quite an intriguing one. For Smart Energy, you have the slightly difficult job of persuading people to put smart meters in their houses. This was probably my favourite job that I had off the back of it, which was to go to, well, we all went to Iceland, as in me and the family all went to Iceland, to do a story on bread that's baked in the geothermal vents of Iceland, and they're huge. I mean, this vent you see in the background there is pumping out 180 litres of boiling water a second. And basically they lower that pot you can see next to me with the bread into it for about 24 hours to cook. And yeah, so I went to do a travel piece for the Daily Telegraph all about it. This is a much less dramatic hot spring, but still, nonetheless, under that sand, it was yeah, there was boiling water coming out. So, and it actually made a very, very nice piece of bread. It's jolly hard work, eating mussels in a hot tub beside the sea, but I managed to fight my way through it all right, really. And yeah, as I say, it ended up being a front page piece for the Telegraph Travel, which was great fun, really. This is a company who I now do quite a lot of work now on Zoom, but used to be a lot of hen do's and things. Well, mostly hen do's, but so this is actually go to someone's house, but sometimes they'd be going to a commercial kitchen and teach people how to bake something. I'm the only person who's actually done a stag do, which was absolute carnage, but all quite hilarious to say the least, really. Then what else has come? This was a lovely moment back in 2018. The baker's dozen of us ran the London Marathon, which was really, really nice to actually meet bakers from lots of other years and kind of compare notes and get to know them better. So not only did we obviously have the common ground of Bake Off itself, but also doing that marathon. Then there's been a lot of wedding cakes have come since then, two quite different ones. And yes, this is a slightly different way to finish things off. Let me just see if I can get this to go any bigger or play. Let me just see what we can do here. Why it's gone so small. Let me just go to another picture again and go back in. There we go. So yeah, this was something quite fun I did using, let's see if that's going to work. Is that going to play? I was thinking about it. So basically, if it will go, the the tart, the chocolate tart, is on an old microwave motor. Let me just try and go back to another picture and try again. Is on an old microwave motor to spin it around. It's not going to work, is it?
Can you drag the?
It work well on the thing. If I can get that damn thing to work. Let's see if I can just. Yeah, you can kind of, if I scrub through it, you can see what happens. So the microwave motor spins it, whilst the pendulum rocks back and forth, and basically that pendulum is sort of a container, which some of you recognise from. It's actually a bit of sewage pipe. Brand new sewage pipe, I hasten to add, but sewage pipe, which I've kind of bodged together into this pressurized container with the icing in. You release it, and it would decorate the cake and give this quite fun results like that. So, and then the final slide, I hope this will work, but it's all looking a little bit glitchy, is quite an intriguing, probably quite a Cambridge thing, this. And it's something called a double pendulum, which is basically you have a Y shape with this pressurized container at the end, and you get quite a different pattern from that. Let's see if this one will work. I have a feeling it won't. It doesn't look like it will. So this time the tart is not on a microwave motor, it's stationary, but it makes a particular unique pattern as it rocks back and forth. So I can't quite play the video. You can kind of, so that's one of my slightly more out there baking projects, but yeah, quite a fun one to do. So I think basically the end of my main bit of my talk, but if there are any questions, then please do fire away.